All right. Okay, here we go. Okay, the live stream has started. I'm just making sure that we are live everywhere. Okay, let me just make sure we are live. Okay, Naizun Rata, we are live on Instagram. I'll check now to make sure we are live on, make sure we are live on YouTube. Again, we are live on YouTube, and finally, are we live on Facebook? And we are live as well on Facebook. Again, we are in a game. Okay. We are good to go. Okay. All right. Hafade todos hamzu buena hudzung estigi un nuevo na episode Fanachu. Guawi host Midzu Tatlu. I am once again your host. Inan husi Michaelu Hon Bavakwa. And for those of you who are fans and followers of Fanachu, you may remember that we were treated to an episode last year with attorney and veteran and longtime public servant, Siñot Robert G. Cruz. He came by last year and he talked to us about his many years of public service here on Guam. And he surprised some of you with stories about his time at the Park Service here on Guam and how he worked in some of the early days of historic preservation on Guam, getting some of the historic sites that we take for granted nowadays on the island, that he was there for that. And some of you were fascinated because I think some people think they just kind of plopped from the heavens, but no, some people did some work in terms of studying that and actually getting that started. And this is why we should thank your local public servant for the work that they do, because it takes effort to get that started and to maintain it. But he also dropped into his conversation in terms of talking about his life that he and others from Guam had worked with the UN Peacekeepers. And that was something that intrigued a lot of you, and there was some of you who requested that he come back and talk more about that. Because, the United Nations is something that represents the world, it touches every corner of the world. But this is something that's true for a lot of countries, for a lot of areas that have humanitarian needs, a lot of areas that are in crisis. But if you live in a territory, a lot of times you get missed. Some of us know about the United Nations because the UN, we get to go and testify about the state of Guam as a non-self-governing territory, but a lot of other times we don't think about the United Nations. And so for some of you, the fact that people from Guam, such as Siñot Cruz here, had gone and served and joined the United Nations in this way was an eye-opener, and you wanted to hear more about what that experience was like. Because sometimes people here say the United Nations doesn't matter. Who cares about the UN? Lo, giminagat hafatiningot mo. In truth, what do you know about the United Nations? And so it's good to have somebody who can talk to us about, well, what is the United Nations? Who have they? And so I'm so excited that Signor Robert Cruz, that he decided to come back on Fanacho so that he can share some more stories and some more of his experiences from his time with others in the UN Peacekeepers. And so, Sedus Masi Signor, Purifenatomo. And so I want you, if you don't mind, just to give yourself a general introduction again as to kind of who you are and your background before you get into your particular time with the UN Peacekeepers.
Sure. Thank you. Um, well, it was always my dream to work for the United Nations. I know I've thought about it, I think, ever since high school. And I did have a 25-year career with the government of Guam after I got my college education behind me. And so I did have a number of positions, Assistant Attorney General. I worked for the court. I had been with the Guam Department of Commerce, Parks and Recreation Resources Division. When it merged with the Guam Rec Commission, I became the first director of the Department of Parks and Recreation. Great times, exciting, worked with some excellent people, Tony Mariano, David Lotz, Dennis Zermeno, and many others. Okay, and we had community recreation programs, softball leagues, a lot going on. Guam Major League. We had youth recreation centers and competitions ongoing. Very proud of the work at that time. I did do work in submitting the very first application for a National Park Service grant for historic preservation. And so I did cover that the last time. Eventually, I became Guam's first public auditor after I completed law school and actually served 5 years setting up the office, doing performance audits, coordinating financial audits, training staff. In fact, we had an association of Pacific Island public auditors that I was actually chairman and hosted one training session on Guam. But 5 years into my 6-year appointment, it was going to be elected, and I got it. I heard from the State Auditors Association that the State Department was looking for state employees that might like to work for a limited period for the United Nations Department of Peacekeeping Operations mission in Kosovo, a very troubled part of the world at the time. And so I actually submitted a cover letter on a resume and didn't hear anything for about a month. And then I got this email that said I was hired and they wanted me to get on a plane in a week. And I thought, I can't do this. I've got audits that we're finishing up. I was actually scheduled to be a speaker at the Western Intergovernmental Forum audit forum in Honolulu. So I wrote back, said I'd be happy to accept the offer of temporary employment, but I need at least a month or two to finish up current work. So they acknowledged it, said yes, do it, and so that's essentially what I did. I got on a plane and flew to Zurich, and then Korean Airlines to Zurich, and then on to Kosovo, Pristina. Actually, it was the closest airport that was open. It was in the adjoining country, Skopje, Macedonia. So I flew in, was met by a British soldier, and he picked up, I think, 4 others, and we proceeded 2-hour drive to get into Kosovo, Pristina. My appointment was for 6 months. I held the title of Civil Affairs Officer, but I was a civilian employee. One of actually 900 international employees that were hired to essentially run the government on an interim basis until they could have elections. And I eventually did volunteer to serve in 3 elections. And and at one of the elections, I actually went into the break room, and there were these 2 guys sitting in a couch, and they looked very familiar. And it ended up it was Ralph Scambaluri and Jess Guerrero, 2 Guam police officers who had taken leave of absence from the Guam Police Department to work for a year or 2 with the United Nations mission in Kosovo. And eventually there were others, approximately a dozen that eventually came to Kosovo. Some stayed for years. So that's how I actually got started. I had 4 different jobs as the UN grew from 1999 when I first joined to June of 2006 when they started to have the locals take control of government. And so my last job, the last 6 months, I was actually UN monitor and legal advisor to the only ethnic Serb in the Ministry of Communities and Returns. And but I did have other positions. My first one was actually as helping with the registration, the civil registration of the population of Kosovo, which was about 90% ethnic Albanian. The remaining were Serbs, and then there were other smaller minorities, Roma, Bosnians, etc. During this period, we worked hard to try to register the population because we wanted them to take control of their own government. Kosovo was part of Serbia and Montenegro. They were an autonomous region, but there was ethnic cleansing that went on. It was terrible. The Serbs were looking for a greater Serbia, and there was conflict with other adjoining nations, as well as the autonomous region in Kosovo. The original Yugoslavia was under Marshal Tito, was a communist nation that eventually split into, I believe, 7 nations. And so the Serbs were one of the very largest minority ethnic groups. Most of them are Orthodox Christians. The Kosovars and the Bosnians were Muslims. Croatians were Catholics. So anyway, there was conflict for many years in the 90s and 2000s. And so I was a civilian employee helping with that initially. I then became a consular officer in charge of issuing temporary travel documents and assisting individuals to travel, helping with visas. And I had the honor of working for a very famous, distinguished individual, Dr. Bernard Kouchner. Dr. Kouchner was one of the co-founders of the Doctors Without Borders in France. And then he also left that group to form Doctors of the World. Dr. Kouchner later also became French health minister and French foreign minister under the presidency of Sarkozy. He's been described as one of the most famous and influential individuals of the Jewish faith in the world. He's had, I think, dozens of positions in international organizations, and it was my honor to work for him directly doing travel documents, assisting individuals. Initially, we were given a quota of 5 per day, and eventually ended up issuing over 100. So I had one of only 3 UN SEALs, and I basically prepared documents that allowed people to travel. to put into perspective, the Serbs, when they did the ethnic cleansing, and essentially took over the Kosovo government and sidelined all of the ethnic Albanians, they destroyed passports. They forced the populations to leave their residences. Often they were looted and then burned. UN rebuilt, with all the help from donor countries, rebuilt 50,000 homes that had been destroyed. So the UN was partners with the Kosovo Force, K-Force, and it was American-led, NATO-led, basically. General Mark Clark was the overall commander. And many, many nations provided military troops, including the US, which had the largest contingent and the best base, Camp Bondsteel. Approximately 4,000, 4,500 American infantry brigades were brought in, rotating from the two infantry divisions that remained in Germany prior to the outbreak of the Iraq War. So those brigades rotated through, and eventually, when the Iraq War occurred, they deployed, and the Camp Bondsteel, the American presence, was replaced by Army Reserve, Army National Guard. So I felt right at home. I had just completed a 28-year career, Army Reserve, Army Guard, Infantry, Corps of Engineers, branches, and so all that time I had spent in the military, as well as 4 years Army ROTC at Santa Clara University. We were trained to go to war with the Soviet Union, Russia. It was everything from my very first officer basic course to completion of the Command and General Staff course. It was basically trying to defend against an invasion in Germany, fill the gap, they called it. So to my surprise, there's approximately 50,000 NATO troops, but alongside them were Russian Army and Ukraine Army. So I was able to see all that equipment up close and even try the Russian rations. Initially, the Russians had the best medical unit, which the UN staff were allowed to use, until eventually we had our own medical services set up. So that's kind of rough background of at least some of the initial work that I did. But one of the things that I want to really focus on was I met Guam police officers there. They were part of the International Civilian Police, which numbered between 3,500 to about 4,500. The Guam police chief, acting police chief Ron Dervishi, he was Ron Dervish. He was former, I believe, FBI agent here in Guam. And he had let some of the Guam police officers take a leave of absence to actually serve with the UN. And what was surprising was to learn that Ron Dervish was actually born in Kosovo. He was born in Kosovo. He left as a child to the US with his family. And so there was obviously sympathy to allow some Guam police officers to go to Kosovo. They had to be employed by DynCorp, which was a private security company, huge company. And DynCorp had to provide 550 American police officers at any given time to the UN Department of Peacekeeping for the specific mission in Kosovo. The civilian police were part of a the responsibilities basically included all the police work necessary, uh, training of locals to eventually take over. And so they're down now to, I guess, only about after Kosovo declared independence, the international police really downsized. So we ended up with, I think now there's only like 7 US police advisors there. But about a dozen from Guam showed up. First one to knock on my door in my apartment in Pristina was the late Ferdinand Ferdi Ibaba. I don't know if any of you know him, but he sadly he served about 4 years in Kosovo, and wonderful person. Gosh, Ferd was well liked by everyone. Very intelligent. He had served in the military police company in the National Guard with me when I was in the Guard, and he ended up actually deploying to Iraq with the military police company that was activated to serve in Iraq. But Ferd transferred to the mission in Iraq when DynCorp was asked to provide 1,000 police there. And sadly, in November 2004, we learned that he and 2 others had been killed in a suicide attack. Although I've heard different stories that it was a mortar attack or that it was IED. But anyway, we lost Ferd and 2 other former UN civilian police who were together there in Iraq. Others that served, they include 2 women, Joanne Oliva and Helen Vivar, Ed Toves, Ron Santos, Frank Perez, J.R. Cruz, Mark Thornton. And we also had one woman from the Guam police that served, I believe, in Bosnia.
And, Siñot, very quickly, are some of the people that you're referring to are in this picture that you shared?
Yes.
Okay. And so, because when I put this in the flyer and put it on social media, some of the people were responding to this. They said, RIP Ferdinand, for example, because as you mentioned, he was definitely somebody who was well liked, and people were responding to his tragic death, and so yes, you were listing some of the people here, and so I wanted to throw it up on the screen real fast. So some of you, I think some of the people who are tuning in, and we've got a bunch of you that are tuning in. And so if you have questions or if you have comments, please go ahead and type them out, send them to me. We have a few that have sent in, but we don't have much so far. And so but yes, so Senor, I've got it on the screen now with the Guam flag. So go ahead and continue, though. I wanted to let you know.
Great. Okay, yeah, Ferd had been the public information officer when Jack Shimizu was the chief of police. And he was on the far right of the photo, and right next to Helen Vivar. We called her Tweety because she had a Tweety bird tattoo. And I believe she was one of them that stayed beyond the deployment with DynCorp, and Ed Toves as well. Ed Toves ended up marrying a local Albanian woman. And but I've lost track of pretty much everyone in the picture, as well as the others that were not in the photo that served. So this was my work in Mitrovica was really, I guess, what I'm going to remember for the rest of my life. Again, it was a dangerous location within Kosovo, the most dangerous. We've had 7 civilian police officers that were killed in Kosovo. 4 of them died in Mitrovica, where I was. in different incidents. And in 2001, there was an article in Time magazine that said that Mitrovica was the most dangerous city in Europe. I believe that came from an interview with Richard Holbrooke. But and there was truth to that. I had threats to my life. I was offered police protection. I didn't take it, but I was actually, my residence was in what they called the confidence zone. And I had a French army company right behind my apartment building. Our regional headquarters was in the same compound. And it was where all the different ethnic groups met. We had the municipal government offices there. And in Mitrovica, I served initially as the legal officer. I had both a Serb and an Albanian lawyers working for me. Kosovo was Serbia was Yugoslavia was a communist country, and they had unique laws. Okay, very different from American jurisprudence and what I had been trained in. So it was a challenge, and that's why I relied heavily on the local Albanian attorneys who were under me. I did organize a municipal and regional legal officers association. We had a very successful initial meeting in Mitrovica, and I had over 20 international attorneys and local staff, local attorneys attend. And one of my goals was to try to set up a digest of legal opinions so that we could share, how we would tackle legal issues and decisions and opinions that would occur in our daily work. I'm proud of that, and I believe it was really helpful for all of us. We ended up, in 2004, we had huge riots that occurred throughout Kosovo, and it was very sad because it set back Kosovo, I thought, years. Hundreds of Serbs were attacked. At least, I believe there were a total of something like 67 military peacekeepers that died in Kosovo. There were many, many countries that contributed, the military, but that incident in 2004, they even attacked UN vehicles. Our UN regional headquarters was taken over. I and others were evacuated into the French army camp, where we saw the Serb village below us, houses being burnt, looted and burned. So the Serb population was relocated to the Serb half of Mitrovica, the northern half, where I was actually at that point the city manager. The northern half, which is divided by the Ibar River, was essentially Serb. The southern half was Albanian, and it was dangerous for Albanians to go to the north and dangerous for Serbs to go to the south. They would be attacked. I had one UN vehicle destroyed in that incident in 2004, and luckily the driver was not injured, but that was a challenge. I had 132 employees under me, including 7 internationals, and we basically worked on improving, repairing everything from elevators to other structures, schools. and for which the population was very grateful. A lot of donor countries, millions and millions of dollars of work. So I had a hand in the repair reconstruction work that occurred. So that was maybe the most exciting time period. Again, I spent a week in this French Army camp. What was interesting was it wasn't all danger and hard work. I had I actually organized an open mic session in our UN lounge. I play guitar and ukulele, and I just put an announcement out saying any musicians who would like to do some performing, let's have a meeting. And I had over 20 individuals show up. So we set up a schedule. And, I remember the first time I got on stage with others, there were 8 of us with guitars. And that's a bit too many. You've got to coordinate what key to play and what song. So what songs? And so I was invited by the Spaniard guitar player. He saw me carrying my guitar once from actually a mass church. I played music for mass, and he said, let's form a band. So we had a German individual who played the trumpet, and eventually we had it was multi-ethnic. We were very proud. We had a Serb bass player initially, and an Albanian drummer. The drummer was very poor, so we internationals actually bought him his drum set. The Serb bass player, Ljubija, he actually was in 2 other bands, and so he eventually left us. But our regional boss was recruited to be a bass player. He had this beautiful red bass, and what was interesting was when I was evacuated into the French Army camp, I ended up sleeping on the floor of their gym. Right next to me was my boss, okay, the regional um, um, manager of the UN operation in the Mitrovica and the region, actually, other cities. And he had his base. And he told me, half jokingly, I think he said, Bob, they can have my UN papers, but they weren't going to get my base. So anyway, we performed at different UN parties, concerts. We also actually opened up for 3 different jazz and blues festivals that were in right there in the Mitrovica area, and I was very very happy to participate. Initially, we weren't allowed to bring our Albanian drummer. He was an employee, and they were afraid that he would be attacked if people knew that he was a Serb. And so we weren't allowed to bring him the first 2 years that we performed, and we made do with. I played a bit of percussion, tambourine, sticks. We made do, and it was appreciated. In fact, it was televised on Serb television in Serbia. But we he wanted to go that third time, and we were happy that we brought him, because afterwards, people in the audience who were Serbs, who he had gone to high school with, came up to him and congratulated him, and we felt really good about that. Yeah. So anyway, my final appointment for 6 months was I got it. You could say a promotion. I went to the ministry, and that was challenging, but certainly not not the same as in Mitrovica. And I really did appreciate that opportunity to serve. So a couple of things that I'd like to actually say is, we had Chamorros there. We had Ferd was Filipino. He spoke basically Ilocano. In fact, he he wasn't like Filipinos raised in the Philippines where they're required to learn Filipino Tagalog. So he came to Guam and his family spoke Ilocano, and as I understood that, I mean, I sensed that there was times when the other Filipinos that were there, and there were dozens, UN staff, and even some 30 Filipino police officers that served. But Ferd was um, not that fluent, I guess, in Tagalog. But again, great guy, and it was really sad to lose him. But the point I want to make is there are jobs in the United Nations and in many other international organizations. There's a website, unjobs.org, and there are thousands of jobs listed. There were over 2,000 that I saw today, not just with the many UN agencies, but also with other international organizations. And there's probably 100 organizations listed on that unjobs.org, as well as duty stations. Okay, jobs with different organizations, say in Tokyo. There have been jobs listed in Micronesia. So I would really encourage people to take a look at that site if you have any interest at all in seeing some of the world away from Guam, away from the US, away from places that we in Guam tend to go to, Tokyo, Manila, other islands in Micronesia. Another point I'd like to make is that when I was there was a list of countries that were underrepresented in the United Nations organizations. Palau was listed, Marshalls were listed, FSM was listed. So it was almost like there was an affirmative action program where they were looking for increased applicants. The lead singer in our band, we called it the Blue Bridge Band, after the bridge that crossed the Ibar River with blue lights. The French government donated lighting, and we named our band the Blue Bridge Band. But Neil Nolan, our lead singer, an American, tried to he was trying to get a permanent job in the UN. We were in the mission, and he was wanting a job in the main UN organization in New York. And he was told the US is overrepresented. So Neil ended up working for the Organization for Cooperation of Security in Europe, OSCE, and he's actually in Ukraine. He's in Kyiv now, and we're in communication. Neil, you wouldn't believe from his postings on Facebook and whatever that he's in a war zone, because he's in a band and he's performing regularly. He loves jazz, and so anyway, those are just some things I'd like to mention, and I would like to encourage anyone that has an interest, look at that unjobs.org. And it's possible. There's everything from drivers to secretaries, all the positions that are needed for countries that are, where the UN might be involved in nation building, or even other international organizations.
Oh, seduce Masi, Siñot. There were some people that did want to know about music, your music at the during your time in Kosovo, and so you did address that. There was some there were some comments online that said, talk about when you played in a band, talk about the jazz festivals. And I do think though that that is an important thing to remember because sometimes we think about it's important not to sort of imagine the rest of the world in extremes. Sort of that people who are struggling on the other side of the world only live in constant struggle, but they also want to experience joy. They want to experience normality. They want to educate. They want to live better lives. They want so many of the same things that people everywhere want too. And so if you reduce them to the simplicity of a humanitarian for 50 cents a day, the price of a cup of coffee, you too can, and if you reduce them in that way, then you miss some of the humanity that they are. And so that's why I think even in your story of just talking about how this was a war zone, there was very real risks. There was people who are struggling, there was people who are afraid, but at the same time, people wanted to live. And there's all these ways that people were trying to live and survive too. And so and thank you. And I do want to also mention, because I think you had mentioned this before. One of the people that was also there might have been my cousin, Matthew Artero.
Oh yeah, Matt.
Mm.
Matt was. I was the infantry battalion commander, first of the 294th, the Guard Infantry Battalion. I was the third one. Matt was a lieutenant. He was the intelligence officer, S2 officer. So, you know, Matt ended up in Kosovo while I was there. He was the J2. He was a full colonel at that point. He was the J2 intelligence for the brigade. And this was when basically there was an Army Reserve general. And so Matthew was one who had been recruited to serve in Kosovo. Um, there was I recall, I think he served something like 24 years, retired. Matt has a family that's like mine, served in the military. My dad was a retired chief petty officer in the Navy and master sergeant in the Air Force. I have a brother, Alan, who's a retired colonel, Marine Corps Reserve. He served, I think, a total of 11 years on active duty, Vietnam as an artilleryman, and then eventually got to full colonel. One of only a handful of Chamorros that's reached that. But Matt's family is amazing. His father, Franklin, was a command sergeant major, active duty, and also was in the Guard. He's one of our advisors, I believe. And he's got a sister that was the very first Chamorro female to make general officer. He's got a brother, Anthony, who's I think, a colonel, Army, and a brother who's Air Force colonel.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
amazing,
Yeah,
amazing
like
family.
yeah. Oh yes, if it's one of my cousins and they're in the military, it's one of my Artero cousins. Because a lot of service and distinction in that side of the family. But and then I do want to also bring up just because and there have been more than a few questions that have come in just because the time that you were serving versus where we are in the world today, in terms of internationalism, in terms of the United Nations, where the United States is at. And so, um, if you had been asked a question about what is the United Nations 20 years ago after your service in the Peacekeepers, you might have given one answer, but today, after sort of the direction of the United States, you might give a different answer. But
Yeah.
and so what is the value of the United Nations? What is the value of internationalism? So there's a few different questions all connected to this. Just wanting to hear after your experience, especially coming from Guam, serving in all the many different ways that you have, serving in Kosovo, seeing that part of the UN. Why is the UN important? Why is internationalism? Why are these things important?
Sure. U.S. has always been dominant since World War II. We're on the UN Security Council. We have veto power, as do the Chinese, the Russians, France, UK, and but there's 193 nations, and I think that's something that we forget. You know, we're Americans generally um, aren't so interested in what's going on in the world today unless it affects their pocketbook, and it's just so different. I'm disappointed that the UN um, has been the U.S. presently owes something like $2 billion to the UN. When the UN was set up, the cost of the UN agencies, the cost of running everything, hiring staff, etc., was based on the wealth of nations. So the US, of course, is the wealthiest nation in the world, was assessed something like 20% of the 25% of the cost of UN operations. But, with the current administration, there's actually an effort to try to pressure, use the US power to try to make changes in the UN according to what the US wants, what President Trump wants, and others, to put burdens on other countries and not for the US to carry the load. So right now, US is on purpose withheld money for different operations, trying to force the UN organizations to become more efficient. And I agree with the goal, but I don't agree with the way that it's being done. And it has caused big concern among the other nations and among the UN staff, the leadership. The Secretary General Guterres, he used to be the Portuguese Prime Minister. So, and he's had a long history of involvement in international activities, but he's faced with having to, deal with all of the various operations. There's something like 14 or 15 current missions around the world. Lebanon is one where right now that's in a crisis because we've had many of the peacekeepers, uniformed peacekeepers, killed, trying to maintain peace between basically the Israelis and the Lebanese population. Lebanon is not completely Arab. There's a large Christian population. I went to Santa Clara University with a Lebanese Christian, and I worked with a Lebanese Christian in Kosovo, an engineer, and actually, got to be friends with him. But Lebanon, we've got uniformed peacekeepers that are being killed in the exchange of artillery and rocket fire that's happening right now. So there are big changes. The U.S. has lost its soft power. We got rid of USAID terribly. It was just abrupt and done in an absolute horrific way. It really bothers me the way that the Trump administration did that, and basically said everybody has to return to the U.S. within 30 days, or you're going to be considered have resigning. These are people that have devoted their lives uh, set down roots, developed relationships, networks among the governments and people of these countries all over the world with very worthy programs. You know, if I sound like I'm a globalist, I am. If I sound like I'm liberal, progressive, I am. And so it does pain me to see what's going on. You know, after I left the UN in 2006, I actually applied. I actually had participated in job hunting internationally, and I was asked to be part of teams that were trying to get USAID grants to do different projects in other countries. When I came back to Guam, Doris Flores Brooks asked. I was basically hired to be legal counsel and hearing officer for the Office of Public Accountability. And at that time, I was actually interviewed for a job in Liberia, working with their public auditor office. I wasn't selected, but you know, working for the UN really broadened my outlook on life. And so I really did think about working elsewhere. I have let me mention, I'm just thinking of, I have a son, Keith Cruz. He has been, he went to Japan, got his master's in business administration, spent a year, frustrating year, tried to get a job in Japan, in Tokyo. And but he's ended up here in Guam, and his field is in data, and he's really top notch in that area. And but he likes to live in other countries, and so he's lived in he's he works remotely, and so he's worked in Taiwan and Taipei twice remotely, and he's going to be getting on a plane, I think, this weekend to go to Manila, and he'll be working remotely from there. So, you know, it's possible. You know, you can be employed and actually live almost anywhere if you work remotely.
Oh, Sejus Masi Senor. Sejus Masi. I think we had a lot of people tuning in from all over. We had a few people, most mainly from the Marianas, but some from our diaspora. A few people tuning in from across the other sea. A few people tuning in from the Atlantic, from across the Atlantic. Some people watching from Europe, interestingly enough, too. And so this was very, it was what I really appreciated about this conversation was just that it helps to really push our imagination about kind of in the way that you phrased it was the usual places that people from Guam go. Like you said, where is it that we go? We tend to go to California. We tend to go to Texas. We tend to go to Tokyo. We tend to go here. We tend to go there. And I posted the UN jobs link into the comments on the live streams because it opens up the world, to just remember that there's so much more that's out there. The United States is a big place. There's plenty to do there. There's plenty to learn there, but there's so much more beyond the United States too. And we gain some wisdom. And I think that your experiences gave you quite a bit of wisdom too, that you've learned a lot going to college in the States, connecting, but you've also gained some wisdom too by going to Kosovo and seeing a very different part of the world and so on. And so I want to give you just we're just esta kana hokoki chempota, and so I want to give you just a chance to share any final thoughts that you have with those who are tuning in.
Sure. One one thing that I thought about just now was when Tony Palomo was the curator at the Guam Museum, and they had a small operation at the Micronesia Mall. I was working still with the UN, and I approached him and I said, Tony, Tony is the father of Simeon Palomo, the fantastic floral artist, world-class artist. I can't say, you know, much better or anything. I mean, he's amazing. But Tony also had a wonderful background, and I asked him, you know, there's in the UN headquarters in New York, there's like changing exhibits in the Guam Museum. And I said, I can help. I have connections. We can do something there in that UN headquarters. You know, Guam is one of only a handful of non-self-governing territories. Just a handful now. I think most of them, US has a significant number, I think France. But, you know, we had an opportunity, I guess, to, at that point, I had connections and we could have had some kind of exhibit there in the UN headquarters. And the question that he posed to me was, yes, Bob, that is possible, but what's the message that we want to send? And that got me thinking, and I realized, you know, would we just be setting up displays showing how beautiful Guam is, or would we want to bring some of our political issues to the forefront? That we are non-self-governing, that we have never had a vote on our political status, even though I think we spent over a decade, you know, with the Political Status Commission. We haven't, there's been resistance to a vote. Now, I'm a realist. I was on the Guam Election Commission for years. I was the independent member back in 2010. I actually volunteered to serve as an international observer at my own expense in Manila in their national election. But I proposed to the commission, 3 Democrats, the 3 Republicans, that we allow everyone to vote in the election, because I thought it wouldn't make any difference at all, whether you considered yourself Chamorro or whether you didn't, whatever ethnic group you were. And you know, we could even use different color ballots, so we could keep track of who identifies as Chamorro in the election and what their feelings were versus, they call them in the UN language, it's the settler population, those that came later. And so that could be distinguished. But the reality is we've never taken the vote. And even if we did take the vote, it would be non-binding on the US. But I believe, you know, most people would want a closer relationship with the US, full statehood. You know, there's a lot to say for independence. The US, I mean, with our economy here in Guam, I know that we are actually in a much better situation than many countries in the world, maybe dozens and dozens. You might even call them failed nations. But anyway, that's just something that that has bothered me, that we haven't had the election. And there's been wonderful education programs, you know, the volume that was put out. Very impressed, and all the publications, pamphlets, etc., posters, stickers. I just wish we would take the vote and take that step forward.
Jesus, Masi, Siñot. No, and thank you for sharing that about the potential exhibit at the United Nations, and that's an important reflection. What would be the message to the world if Guam had that chance? It's something important to remember. And so, se Deus Masi, Senhor, por ifinatot para este episode Fanachu, I've appreciated who agradeci sinangan mo historia mo buini. Se Deus Masi para todos Samsuni o meegas no me ekong este episode Fanachu este finakpo. Adios, está aqui manad.